There we go. All right. So welcome everybody. We've got a guest today from Chicago. I assume you still live in Chicago, right? And I've actually muted you, so you're going to have to unmute yourself, Zbigniew.
Right here.
There we go.
Yes,
there we go.
I'm in Chicago. Still.
There we go. Okay. So Zbigniew Bzdak is just retiring from the Chicago Trib, and you worked there for what, almost 20 years? Is that what I gathered?
It's all correct.
All correct. Originally from grew up in communist Poland, and basically was would you say you were kind of a photojournalist before photojournalists were allowed in Poland? True?
Well, there were photojournalists. It's just there was no outlet to publish your pictures, especially if you if you touch on a subjects which were not welcomed by the censors.
Someone would come and have a chat with you if you were
No,
lucky?
they just wouldn't let publish. It was very simple. It was a man in a little booth, by the press, and they say yes or no, and that's pretty much end of it.
No discussion after that.
Nope.
Left Poland, went on to do some whitewater rafting around the world and take photos in the Americas, and ended up in Chicago. I guess we'll hear a little bit about that. And it currently has a online exhibit called Without a Trace, and it's basically a series of images that Zbigniew took during the pandemic, and just kind of showing if people didn't exist on Earth is basically what Chicago looked like at that. It reminded me so much of the software that removes people. So you can take a beach picture and then it'll remove all the people in the images, except you didn't have to do that. So Without a Trace is currently being hosted through the Chicago Academy of Science, and I will post a link to that as well as Zbigniew's Instagram site. And I do have to say real quick, looking through your Instagram site is, I wish it was in a book form. It's this beautiful mix of color and black and white and photojournalism and whitewater rafting and drone shots, and it's just kind of all meshed together, and it's really fun to go through and look at. So if you guys get a chance, definitely take a look at that. So if you'd like to just start out, Zbigniew, and tell us a little bit about Poland and how you came into photojournalism and how you ended up at the Chicago Tribune.
Wow, that's a tall order. I don't know. I was prepared to just ramble about the droning, the fun of flying around Chicago and many places.
We'll get to that shortly, but we'll just kind of build up to that.
Now?
Yeah. Your life, and we'll give you a minute and a half.
That I was not prepared, but I do remember a lot of it.
Okay, go ahead.
No. I basically ended up in Chicago Tribune, but my road to the Chicago Tribune was much more complicated. In Poland, I was actually I was a journalist. I worked at the time. I was a student, so I was intern in national magazines, and pretending I do journalism. Journalism was at the time with my editors negotiated, what they want versus what we want, and then what the censors can actually pass through. That was the whole quandrum about the journalists then. It was high volume production. They had a couple of million of copies printed, so it was a big stake, but it was always negotiated. So I did student magazines, which I was in charge of. So we always try to go beyond the censorships, like we had two colors, for example, and we could superimpose, so they could never see the final product, because otherwise we put the pictures and they say yeah or not, and that was it. And the most comical step of censorship was always poetry and cartoons. The drawings were always, because they had to describe to their bosses what they see or what they understand, and sometimes they just didn't do much of that. Anyway, that was then. I left Poland before changes happened. I was in South America when Solidarity was born. I was in South America when Solidarity fell when the martial law. Martial law prevented me from going back to Poland. I ended up in the US. I was at the time in Peru photographing kayaking expeditions and basically traveling for 3 years from Mexico to all the way to Tierra del Fuego. And when I came here, I settled in Wyoming. Wyoming is my basically home state. So I am from Wyoming, if you didn't know.
You did not.
And then ended up going back to Peru and Brazil many, many times. At the time, I was, young and naive, and I working on a couple of stories for National Geographic, which 2 of them were published. 1 was killed. Basically, continuing my big adventure, which was whitewater kayaking or photographing whitewater kayaking. And I finally realized they actually need a real job. And that's how I came to the photojournalism. I started at the newspaper, Casper Star Tribune. And I don't know why I got this job. I was not qualified. I never shot a basketball game in my life, never. And suddenly I was, I was the photographer, the only photographer for Casper Star Tribune. So it was fun. And ended up in Indiana, worked for 10 years in Munster, which is right across the border. Actually, our newspaper was about 300 yards from the border of Illinois. So, and still did some travels for National Geographic expeditions. Mostly, my specialty was the Amazon, sources of Amazon, the Amazon. So a lot of work there, and Colca Canyon, that's the southern Peru. I spent several months there, and also an Amazon basin of Ecuador. So that's my long story. Working for, I started aerial. I just want to go on focus because I mean, this, you asked me to talk about droning and aerial photography. In Peru, I was doing a lot of aerial photography because this was like the deepest canyon in the world. And to show the geography, which is tremendous. I mean, this is like twice depth of Grand Canyon, Colorado. That only vantage to really show that scale was aerial photography. So small Cessnas, this is low budget. We are not on the high budget. There was no helicopters. Actually, they couldn't fly that high anyway. We're talking about 18,000 feet. And then, so small Cessnas and, going with some crazy pilots inside the canyon, which was kind of adventurous. But then when I got to Chicago Tribune, my sort of specialty at the time was disasters. I was doing a lot of disasters because, I was outdoorsy person. I was adventurous. So I got pegged into, if there is a tornado, actually my first assignment for the Tribune, when I got the Tribune a week later, I was going to meet the hurricane, my first hurricane in Louisiana. So I had no idea what I was doing, but I was shipped 5 hours before the hurricane hit. I was in place. So it happened not to be the most disastrous anyway. So that's what I was, that's how I started for, doing stuff with Chicago Tribune. The presentation I'm going to make is about droning, specifically, actually about aerial photography, which is relatively a very small part for what I actually, I was doing for the Tribune. because most of you are news work or have a good knowledge of newspapers. We pretty much do everything, and most of the subjects, most of the stories I worked on, it's it's people's story. It's storytelling with photography. So I was trying to incorporate the aerial photography and into producing regular stories, and that really worked in specifically the stories I was doing last before I left the Tribune, which was a story about climate change, about rising waters from each of the 5 lakes. That I found that drone was probably the most useful tool and very appropriate to show those changes and to show to tell the story basically. So in that presentation, I'm going to put a bunch of pictures from the last project. I didn't put the other pictures because it would be just too many, but this was a newspaper story. It had people, had everything, and plus had an aerial views to illustrate the changes of the lakes, all 5. 2 of them were done during the pandemic. So with a restrictions of travel and restrictions of communications, that the human element kind of evaporated because people didn't want to see you. I couldn't go on a freighter, for example. I couldn't do a lot of things because they were just not available. Couldn't go to Canada too, so it was complicated. And,
go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and make you the host, and you can share your photos and start talking if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, we'll talk about the photos. My life was much just to go back. My journey to the Tribune and what I was doing it's a long and complicated and intertwined a little bit with one of your members, Pete Souza here, because he was my colleague at the Tribune, and then for a very short time, which is 1 year, I was on a campaign trail with President Obama. So the first one, 2008. But let's get to the screen sharing. So what I'm going to do, basically, I will show sort of my last project, which is the Without a Trace. Talk about that. And then I just go through some of the different aerial projects I was working. Does that sounds good? Okay. So I go to screen sharing right now, yes?
Yes, you should be the host, have host privileges, and you can go to share screen right now.
Okay. Okay, I can share the screen. I can share Photo Mechanic. Let me just share Mechanic.
There we go, and we see the whole, all your film strips.
You see the whole take, and then we go on the first image. Yes.
Full image. Yep.
Okay. So the story behind the story is that pandemic struck last year. Was my birthday actually when they declared full closure, and we were allowed to travel downtown, and nobody actually was going to office anyway. But of course, we are in the full alert. This is we knew is one of the biggest stories probably of your lifetime, if there's such a thing. So suddenly I'm going downtown on Monday, and it's a ghost town. I mean, I never seen it like anything like that. And so with my boss, Todd Panagopoulos, he says, well, we can fly. There's no one here. Flying a drone in Chicago, it's actually most of the places, it's legal. It's basically, there is no restrictions as far as FAA is concerned. It's all open. And the biggest problem, of course, it's the rule that you can't fly over people. And in Chicago, pretty much that's eliminates a lot of places, or you have to be very careful at least. Well, with pandemic, suddenly there's no one on the streets. Fly as you wish, and safe manner, because it's always, you can go and fly. There's a lot of yahoos fly through the fireworks, but flying for the newspaper, we have to be very, conscious about following the law, following the rules, and having that be sort of our guidance. But so a lot of everybody was doing some kind of project, because this is your opportunity of a lifetime. Mine became actually this, which was showing empty streets from the drone, from the perspective. So I'm just going through some of the pictures. This is State Street, of course, with very few cars and maybe 2 people. This is all about noon. That's which normally would be a busy place. And never seen anything like that. The streets around the ballpark being totally empty. And of course, then become more of a story once the season was shut down, and all the restaurants, which are left on the bottom, many of them. So that became because at the time we didn't know what the stories are really. Where is that going to lead? And Empty City was one of them. The next day, I started photographing neighborhoods, because everybody knows downtown, which I was going back all the time. I got permission from the city that I could actually launch drone from the park property, from like a Grand Park. Normally, you would have to do it on a street. It's legal, but you have to do it on a street, on a public access. They cannot grant you that for their own liability. So that's what empty Chinatown would look like at noon. The same on the river. I mean, that's just, a busy place. And just so I say, there's a lot of pretty pictures of Chicago. My premise here was to show the emptiness, to show something which was also dated. Happened to be that those initial days of the pandemic were murky. They had, little haze. And I think that, to me, added to telling the story, because you concentrate more on the emptiness, not on the pretty features which we normally see in Chicago. That's Lakeshore Drive leading to Chicago. Normally, that's about the rush hour. So I just got off this ramp right in here, and I said, this is unreal. So I just pulled in a parking lot and started photographing. That's one of my first pictures. I was coming to Chicago. And then we go to the Millennium Park, and Millennium Park at the time had some, it was totally empty. The barriers were set up, and you cannot even go in. Plus, there was really no one there to stumble across. But the park was still functional. They had security. That's the only people who basically, asked what I was doing. But it's ultimately, I got the permission from the city. And so I could just check with the security. It was not totally necessary, but when you're flying, the most important thing to me is not to be distracted. I don't want to deal with somebody. So I always we have a technician, Peter Tsai, who is a good photographer as well. He was my eye in the sky. So as FAA would call it, visual observer, VO. So we both work, and in case if somebody was after us or even asking friendly questions, he would entertain them, and I was flying. With no people around, I was pretty comfortable doing whatever I could do. I went all the way high up, except we had the low clouds coming and popping in, which was kind of a interesting, and it was windy. But normally I researched this very well, and there was no really danger for me to be in trouble. This is the Puerto Rican, just the gateway is also empty. Some of the neighborhoods was actually not as empty as I would imagine, because people had to do something. And but generally speaking, normally this is just full of people. So that was very unusual. To be very honest, when I was doing this, I didn't see the big picture yet. So this became a collection of photos about a couple of months later, when the museum approached me, and basically I made a proposal for the exhibit. But as I was working on it, I didn't have, like preconceived ideas what I'm going to do, what I'm going to accomplish. That's a King Drive. It's also normally pretty busy. That's by McCormick. McCormick got shut down, so every road leading to McCormick was shut down. And most of the pictures were like pretty much like 9 o'clock. It was normally it's a busy place. That you could never see in your lifetime before. The bean with all the barriers. Here on the bottom of the screen, you can see two little people. It's really hard to see, you wouldn't know, but there's two little dots. That's me and Pete. But that was fun to have the park entirely to yourself, but spooky. It's really spooky to see a disaster. Like I said, I was in many disasters, and you have the feel, there's something really wrong. And that felt, just being there, that something was just totally wrong. I just, I couldn't pinpoint. Everything was sort of in place, except there was no one there. Very popular tourist place, the bridge. I was waiting for like 5 minutes up in the air with high wind for a lonely car to go by, because there was no one there. That's about 10 a.m. And of course, McDaly Park, empty. It would be probably empty then, but there's always, they put barriers to prevent anybody to even thinking of going in. And of course, the other view may be more open, so gives some more context. It's the bean and all the surroundings, devoid of anyone a living person. And so it Lakeshore Drive, that was in the morning. 2 days later or 3 days later, I went flying again, because normally, the boats are in, everything is in. The Lakeshore Drive, the whole lake access was shut down, so you couldn't nobody could get even close any of those trails. And of course, the fountain, that's sort of landmarks. I was trying to stay away from, the landmarks. I was doing a lot of neighborhoods, but I think some of those are also telling, because that's not how normally they would look at this time of the year. And a little bit later, I stumble into a North Avenue beach, which normally would be set up already, and that was not existent. On the bottom, you can see there's a cop car. I had to actually kind of get myself in. I told them I would be there for half an hour flying. They said, fine, no problem, because there was TV there too. So that was pretty much the project which ended up in the show. But I really had a good time working on that, and that's what had drawn to me was very useful of showing that there's many different ways you can do it. And in Chicago, you can climb the big building and you can do something like that, but those will be different, because some of the advantage, like in the Chinatown, you could not really get from any other place. And flying helicopter would not be feasible anyway. I'm just jumping right now, and I'm just telling kind of from the beginning. I was doing disasters, and and that's how I got kind of those two things mixed up, or at least they grow on each other. So I ended up in New Orleans right after Katrina. We did not go because at the time some budgetary issues, and Katrina was not the national story. As soon as it became national story, I went with another photographer, Kuni Takahashi. Overnight, we just drove and ended up in New Orleans, negotiating access and spending few days there to see the aftermath of that. It was the mass evacuation. When I got there, it was already underway, and the previous picture, that was the first day with the military, was dispatched to facilitate that and to keep some kind of order. I don't know, whatever you call some kind of a peace, because emotions were high, and a lot of misbehaving people, especially from authority side. So they took over, but just waiting around the city. This is on the main streets. I forgot the name, Canal, I think. And you just, so at the time, this wasn't stage. It was a stage where you could actually, some people went to local Walgreens and pick up some of the groceries they needed. This was not looting. This was just basically getting some necessities, and that was not, there was nothing unusual. I didn't see people like looting things. They went to get a bag of chips, or just basically going around. This is from evacuation. That was an outskirts of New Orleans. But I was really lucky too, and that's the first time I was talking to my editors, and it's like, look, flood, because that was the biggest cause in New Orleans. It's a silent thing, you don't see it from the ground. You're just waiting, you go in places, and I was able to actually get in a news chopper and get. It was a 15-minute flight. But having that perspective, stayed with me, because I knew that this kind of disaster, which is a flood, tornado, hurricane, it is really going to show a very different way from the air. Something like that, that's you could not see anything like that being on the ground. So that was very important. Otherwise, I was basically doing evacuations, because going from home to home with rescuers whom I found. You're basically just walking around and hitched the ride on a boat, which was pulling people out of the houses. Some of the neighborhoods. This is close to downtown, actually, right across the highway. People waiting for evacuations. This is close to French Quarter, actually. And maybe sort of a symbolic. This is gateway to 10th Ward, which was probably hit the most. I spent a lot of time later on, and I showed maybe just a couple of pictures because I don't want to get into it too much. This is right on a gateway to the 10th Ward. You cross the canal, you'll be there. So after that, I was touring 10th Ward, and basically destroyed houses. Louis Armstrong, this was a musician I visited. That's in his garage, or his notes. Everything was destroyed, basically. His house was submerged. His instruments. And then the rebirth of that. This was a high school band, the kind of life came to normal, which was really great to witness later on. as they practice. So moving on to different subject, tornadoes. That's what I was doing here because we are in Midwest. That's the disasters. I got countless of them because we have quite few of them every year, and it's our sort of duty to report on that. Normally, that's what you see. Houses being torn apart, and people looking, sifting through their belongings. This whole house was actually moved. This is the foundation, and it's always tragic. It's always very unusual, but everybody, people want to share many times because we there to document what they are going through. And I actually, you would think that people would be very hostile, but it's really opposite. I never found the hostility during that. And sometimes we just pitch in, we just help too. I'm losing my voice. So that's part of, this was actually close to home, close to Chicago. And, but that's what you normally see. And I'm switching now to aerials. So this was a huge tornado. You have one, it's a 5-mile path, about, 1 mile I think it was like a 20-mile path to 1 mile on the parameter. So this is Washington, right across the river from Peoria. And I was there night when it happened. I, just drove as soon as it hit. We knew that this is a disaster area. So I was there that night. And then next morning, I had some staging areas for the press, and and I ended up looking for an aerial shot. So we had the plane contracted from Peoria. The problem is that this whole parameter was secured, and if I left this parameter, I probably would have an extremely hard time getting back into the city. But somehow, this was my luck. I see a helicopter landing. So I go in to talk to the guy who was a local helicopter pilot. And he wanted to fly some politicians just to see that. So I asked him, could I hitch a ride? He had the 4-seater. And he says, sure, why not? And he was really enthusiastic. So we spent 2 hours flying around Washington. After that, he took also a TV guy and another freelance colleague of mine who was actually doing freelance for the Time magazine. But it was great. So this is the kind of a path of destruction, which you can only see from the air, really. When you're down below, you see destroyed houses, but you don't know the pattern. You don't know how this thing goes. And from the air, it became apparent the power of this event, and which destroyed, probably like a third of the city. And also the thing I knew because I was in many of those. It's so selective. Some of the houses on the right, you see, they were untouched. They were just standing like nothing ever happened. And a house about half a block, all you see there is a floorboards. There's nothing there. This is the most powerful tornado there is. And talking about tornadoes, when I go to tornado, you see the bark peeled off the trees. That's a tornado which is deadly. And fortunately, in this place, they had enough early warning. Nobody was seriously injured. So this was, this was kind of a, I don't know, when people lost their lives, it's always it's much more somber covering anything. Here actually was a lot of property damage, a lot of injuries, but there were no deaths. but that's what left from the houses. And again, without aerials, I mean, I was going around, you couldn't see anything like that. You couldn't see the scope of it. You couldn't see, that's somebody's basement just filled up with cars, which were randomly put. They're not even from the neighborhood. They are from across, across the town. And that's what the street, which was exposed. When I go now to disasters, you look, peeled bark of the tree is gone here. So this is much more powerful. But if the bark is peeled, that is at least EF3. But here you have a floorboards, wooden floor. That's the only thing it stays. A lot of people had the basements, and that's how they get saved, basically. And but I think for me, this was the most telling. The pilot says, "I show you something you never seen it again." And this is phenomena which was actually later written as a story, because basically, he took this farm, but then was so powerful that even on the ground, that's the marks the tornado was leaving as it was departing. By the way, the same tornado came over my house too, because I was watching that line. I was sitting in my basement and watching that line coming towards me, towards us. We're about, I don't know, it's like 70 miles or something from that place. It was going straight line on my house. And I left home as soon as it passed over, because it jumped in a village over, but there was no destruction. And then it went over my house. I saw in the radar. Anyway, I'm switching gears again. I was another story I was doing. This what my kind of I would say respect to the aerial photography I came from. I went to Williston, North Dakota when the big oil boom happened. Follow local guys who were making kind of a fortune in their age with no education. Unfortunately, that was short lasting, and this guy actually he died later when he came back home. But so I spent some time, having a difficult access because to the oil rigs, because it's too dangerous, they say. But my biggest thing came, that the storytelling was actually from the aerials. I was able to contract a small plane, and totally young and totally crazy pilot who we could not afford a helicopter, because at the time in Williston was like 10 jets came from Texas every day, and all the helicopters were working on the rigs. So the helicopter, they said, about $1,500 an hour, we can fly you. And I was like, I don't think we can afford that. So I found a local pilot who was very young, and we could cover ground between Dakota and Wyoming. We could cover like 100 miles basically. But I think that really was a big part of the story, to see how, every few miles there was an oil rig basically in the ground. And of course, all the environmental issues come with it. That's lined pit, of course, as you know, they last some time, but unfortunately they're going to leak, and they are going to cause the problems. This was cleaning of the hull, basically. This is all when you pump all these chemicals, which that's how you get the oil. This is probably the most dangerous, the more deadly part of the operation. And the pilot actually knew the area very well. So he said, I flew with some people. So he found that this assembles, and that takes about 2 days only, and then everybody leaves. So to have that assembly was very difficult to find. And otherwise you have, the installations producing the oil. but basically every few miles you had a rig right there on the ground. And of course, I was photographing whatever I could see. That was a part of it too. Farms, the sort of the colors of the rigs, which is pretty spectacular actually, because it's so foreign to that land, which is pretty empty. And of course, talking to people, that's overnight they would build a city basically around that installations. Some of those houses were, because people spent 2 weeks on the rig, so they would exchange. So you had no permanent resident. It's like a hotel. And of course, the more the people who had their own homes, they would bring them in and assemble like this. So that became another city inside the city. Again, aerials were the big part of seeing that kind of a scope, because otherwise you wouldn't, I had the pictures from the bars, from other things, but for this, I wanted to show aerials. The same with Chicago. I did a lot of aerials in Chicago prior the drone technology being so available and safe. We do flights, not necessary for the news in Chicago, because that's really difficult, because usually you would have a sort of a competition with agencies, and you probably would be welcome. Like I was attempted to fly when the airplane crashed in the Midway, but they put TFR, which is the temporary flight restriction, on everybody except for the commercial planes, so we couldn't even get close. So covering news from helicopter, it's not that easy unless you have video cameras with powerful zooms, they can hover about a mile from the side and they can focus on it. For us, it's not that easy. But anyway, this is like a little collection of flights I was doing in Chicago. Usually this was not the subject for my flight. This was something I was doing because I was up in the air downtown and, or in other areas in Chicago. And I was able to see it and tell pilot to just hold on for a minute. I need the pictures. This is Lincoln Park, by the way. Then something that I could not do with drone flying over people, I could do it from helicopter. On the south side, in and out, basically, during just going in and out. When I saw something interesting, I asked pilot to just, slow down, make a circle and move on. That's a south side golf course by the Pound. It's a pretty amazing place. And the schoolyards, anything I could see. At the time we fly lower. Now the pilots fly 400 feet because that's above the drone reach. So there was everybody is flying a little bit higher. That kind of thing I could actually do from the drone, which is much more difficult with access, but that's close to my home, is a quarry by the airport. This was also just going in and out to the airport. I was photographing that. It's another place that's in Waukegan, last coal-powered plant there is. So just looking at the environmental, couldn't fly there because it's close to the airport with the drone. But as far as flying helicopters, this is the most unique. I'm right above the control tower in O'Hare. You could never do a drone. That's impossible. And a helicopter was really tricky too, because you're in very busy airspace. And so the pilot, who was really good, talked to the tower, and the guy said, "Look, we're really busy at this moment, and we cannot." I had to photograph a highway close. That was my assignment. He said, "We we can't do anything right now for you. The only thing you can be right now is right above our heads, because that's the safest place. Nobody's going to do anything to you. So we hovered for 15 minutes, and then they gave us 2 minutes window to photograph that highway. So it's kind of interesting that I was sitting right where it happens for 15 minutes waiting for that small window. So that was one of my assignments. That's something also that it's extremely difficult to do with drone, because you have a limited lens range unless you have a really big professional drone and you have a longer lens. That was about sort of wild development in the story, which that was very appropriate to be a helicopter. And of course, different views of Chicago. Possible with drone, difficult because also long range, long lens. That I can do with drone very easily. At the south side, old US Steel place is just tremendous place. I'd love to fly all over the southeast side and east side, and I'm going to show some of that. This is another story with aerials, which can be told well. It's about it's called not charcoal. It's called it's the coal dust. Since that they removed, because there was big opposition. This thing was making dust of very toxic dust in the neighborhoods. And of course, pretty things. I don't photograph pretty things normally, because there's people who do that much better and have more motivations than I do. But once I'm there, it's really nice to see. Southeast side again, there's a sulfur blowing around. It's basically that's Calumet River. So it's pretty tremendous because it's big developments and there is a lot of neighborhoods around there. And of course, some of it, I don't even know what it is. I kind of researched later on because I can find that, but that seemed like a more of non-toxic substance there on the pier. And of course, this actually kind of goes with stories of the day, which is the shredders. That's also located by the river because they can bring in and out the material very quickly. So I was always fascinating the composition of the car. You have the wheels, you have the other things, and then suddenly you have just dust. There's nothing there from that. That's the operation of the shredding or recycling. And I didn't even know there is such a thing like a graveyard for the train. That's when they decompose themselves, I guess. And always get a pretty picture. And that's by the airport, and that's actually from the drone. That's close, on the south of Chicago. And just the thing you see when you're up in the air, which I did not anticipate. It's just there. Now I'm just going to the last project, and I have another. Okay, I will crank this in 10 minutes. This is the Great Lake projects, which I'm going to go. I'm just watching the time here, so I'm going to go quickly. This is the most recent project. It's about climate change on the lakes. That was a project which was Chicago Tribune, and we had a grant from the Pulitzer Center for Investigative Reporting. So the Pulitzer actually paid a lot of the expenses for this project. It was basically examining each lake and the issues. Since I'm kind of running out of time, I'm going to skip some of, because I had to learn about each lake, and then we had to go. Each lake has really different issues, even they are kind of interconnected. This is Lake Michigan. Of course, we had, disasters of water rising, weather getting very violent and destroying the houses. And that just small part of what the problems are. But it makes spectacular photos, seeing from the ground. And it was a big part of this project. And of course, the most popular thing nowadays, that's right in that's on 57th Street in Lake Michigan in Chicago. But then I was going up, and you can see that's the trails being totally destroyed. They were rebuilt, not, they are rebuilding right now, but it was, the action you saw in the previous photos just basically just destroy, and the high water level. And of course, residential areas the same way. They're just collapsing under the weight of the waves. That place what I show, there was a few days later after this storm hit, when people were evacuating from the building. Then normally that's a high bank. That's, people can actually enjoy the water because it was so high last summer. And this is all drone, this is no helicopter. I was flying at the Dunes National Park, the Indiana Dunes. I got a permit from a National Park Service, limited permit to fly drone anywhere I wanted at the park. But this is an edge of the park and a residential area built without probably much of a planning, because now they have to protect all the areas with big ugly walls, which are not even effective. This place, they just raised the wall. That's a historic house on Beverly Shores. NPS tried to be very conscious about not changing the nature, but they finally started and putting a enforcement on the banks, because it was taking out the road. Lake Huron. We look at the Lake Huron. Lake Huron is connected Lake Michigan, so the same problems: high water level and violent weather. This normally is an island that whatever left from it, it was kind of a part of our story, because it's a crazy guy who lived there who bought this island for $30,000. And I was trying to sell for a couple million, but unfortunately that water level would not let him do it. That's the guy. And again, and that's another person who lives across, and that's what's left from his little island is actually the house only. So again, the droning was kind of appropriate thing to look at, to see some of the destructions. Lake Huron, I went to Canada, and which doesn't allow drones, except for, I can tell you what I did. This is actually a fish hatchery in the tribal land. And that's the tribal grounds in Manitoulin Island. I'm speeding it up. Lake Erie, it's of course algae. That's the biggest problem which they have to wrestle with. The city of Toledo, water is almost cut off, was before compromised. So that's their biggest issue. That's the fishermen on Sandusky. I always love that, because the idling park, and you have the fishing boats. That's the only time they can do it, when there's no guests in the parks. And this is Toledo water intake. This was pretty difficult to fly. They had to fly from the boat, and Toledo has only one intake, one crib. That's it. So when the water gets contaminated with algae, they stuck. They have to do it, either shut it off or clean it up, which is more difficult. Cause of the algae is agriculture. This is actually a tractor spraying, sour. It's actually spraying from the cow farms, the shit basically. So that's what drains into the lake, bringing the algae to bloom. And this is the place where they, accumulate this, was able to get into the capo, which is the big farms, which is very unusual. I don't think that you cannot really fly. It's private property, but it's not private property. There's no access. You know, that's a lot of acreage. I got the permission to fly, which is pretty unusual to actually see those kind of areas. Lake Ontario. How am I doing on time, anyways, Steve? We should be wrapping, yes?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, you know, in the next 5-10 minutes.
Okay. That's during pandemic. We actually went to New York and look at Lake Ontario. Similar problems, but much larger scale because there is much more population in there. So they're inventing putting like artificial islands as a barriers to the bays so they can prevent some of the water running into it. They have similar problems with high water rising, and even it's regulated, but it's regulated by international board between Canada and US. Another regulated lake, by the way, is Lake Superior. Lake Superior water can be drained through the Sioux. So, you know, they invent a lot of different ways of preventing the destruction. It's all in the private hands, most of the area. So I'm just going through. I'm going back to Lake Michigan because that's for us the most important. This is Sagatuck, and even you can see the water is rising and everything is wrong. They're still building houses because that's a new development. What puzzled me about this house is that they already put the rocks around it, you know. So from get-go, this is a lose-lose proposition because this house is going to be gone eventually. But they're still building it because it's just such a desirable place on earth to be on the lakeshore in Michigan, especially by Sagatuck, which is, you know, a few hours from Chicago. That's also from drone, but that's on the Sagatuck River. And houses being built, and now the rocks have to be thrown into the lake. So it's a kind of a cycle that they get permit to build. After that, they have to do remedial work to protect it from destruction. The same thing here. Why would they build a new house here? Because somebody gave them permit and the place is going to flood. So, you know, they're putting rocks, which is not really a permanent or a feasible solution to protect from the flood. This is historic structure in one of the state parks in Michigan, and they have to move the whole structure out because the deterioration of the shore is progressing so fast that would collapse. And flying drone also with the bad weather it's somewhat of an adventure. You can withstand about 25 miles an hour wind, but after that, you go into a very difficult decision making whether you can crash or not. But it was kind of fun doing it. And that's also Lake Michigan. Lesser of a problem because even if it takes a bank, well, you can probably rearrange the golf course. And this is another area close to Sagatuck on the ground, putting rocks and forcing the banks, which is a solution, but it's a very temporary solution. And it's not really proven that would be effective forever. Lake Superior, it's the biggest lake, it's the coldest lake, fastest warming one. So normally this would be already frozen and you have a road going to Madeleine Island. The boat was going year around because that lake never froze. So that was last year, right before pandemic. The same thing, that a lot of events on the lake were postponed, but bikers, they could go in because that was enough, you know, safe for the lake. That I go on vacation and I stay usually on the lakeshore, and a lot of good droning there because you could see that shift of the ice happening right in front of you. That's my house for that vacation. There was a yurt right on the lakeshore. Bayfield, that's the Indian tribal fishermen. They can work year round. And that's a tribal land. They have the features of, the famous ice caves on Lake Superior. NPS won't allow you to go on their ground because the ice is not firm enough, but on a tribal land in a bay, it's much more accessible. And I just show you very quickly, this is going to be 10 seconds a piece. My connection to the lakes is personal. I go kayak there and I spend a lot of time, as much time as I can doing that. So this is mostly Lake Superior here on the pictures. And I do at least one long annual pilgrimage. Now having more time, I think that will be happening more often. Big lake, big waves, and big challenge, and fun. That's actually on Lake Michigan, close to home in Indiana. And on the lake, I usually go, and the pictures are kind of a extra. I usually don't. I just always take my camera mounted on a kayak, but sometimes I bring some pictures, sometimes there is none. Kayaking is always good. And camping out, we camp out, we go for 2 weeks sometimes at the time. Things you see from the kayak. And that's from the last trip, which we're allowed to Canada. So this is last picture. I'm stopping sharing, and sorry, it took a very long time. Let me see.
No, don't be sorry.
Out of it.
I'll just reclaim the host, so you don't have to do anything.
Reclaim the host, and because my cursor went away somehow.
Oh, no worries. Let's see. Hopefully that'll bring you back.
Did you get me out of that or not?
Yep. You are on, I think so.
Oh, you know what? I have to get out of this program. Now I think I can see my cursor. I stop share.
There we go. That works.
Okay, sorry it went long. I didn't rehearsal enough.
Don't be sorry. It was fascinating. It's I have a drone, and I know the challenges of trying, when you have the same focal length on every image and you try to mix it up a little bit, it's quite difficult. And the fact of just having the camera away from your person, you're sort of in a three-dimensional viewfinder that you got to kind of put your head in, and obviously you figured that out. It's beautiful work, and thank you for sharing all of that. Let's open it up, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in and ask.
This is Pete. Zbig, I've got just some logistic questions. I think probably most of us here have done aerials with, from a plane or a helicopter, but maybe other than Steve, I don't think any of us have done drones. So just curious as to how you learn to use it, given the restrictions in Chicago. Like, how did you get to the point where you were proficient enough to be able to get a permit to do what you did during the COVID?
Actually, you have to have called 107, part of the 107 of FAA. This is changing really rapidly right now. So the law, but it's basically a commercial license. So you have to have a commercial license to be able to publish your work. So that's the newspaper, they wouldn't be able to publish legally, at least. So you have to do the course, which FAA made it pretty convoluted, let me put this way, but it's going to change now. Basically, it's going to be replaced by something else. But this 107, it's still going to linger as a way to publish or sell or license your work. Chicago has actually the airspace. Most of the downtown, it's pretty much it's legal to fly. So you don't have that many restrictions. The restrictions kick in, which is called TFRs, which is temporary flight restrictions, usually during the games, say Cubs, Sox, Bears. Those are scheduled. So at the time, you cannot be in a radius about 2 miles from the park. The way it's set up right now, FAA set up that I can fly relatively close to the airport to a, say, Midway Airport. I can be in their airspace, and I will have a restriction to how high I can go. And FAA made it actually quite easy that you can request a waiver on your phone, and it's instant. So I can draw a little map where I'm going to be or where I am actually at that moment, and tell them what time I start, and I draw the boundary, and I just send it to FAA, and it takes about 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I got a reply, and I got that authorization for that. So that part, as far as FAA is concerned, it's actually much easier at this moment. And in Chicago, there's only a few areas which would be more difficult to fly. The paramount, the biggest thing of FAA, it's flying over people that you cannot do. That's changing too, by the way. And so in Chicago, the area is you have to find a public place to launch your drone, and then you really cannot be over people directly. It's a tricky definition of that. But the COVID was actually easiest to fly because there were no people. So I didn't have any restrictions as far as to worry about causing any problems.
But in terms of like learning how to use the drone, did you like just set it up in your backyard and practice in a remote location? How did you learn to get proficient at it, is what I'm asking.
Well, Pete, I think like everything else, it's I learned it by myself, by tutorials. And by the way, I never flew drone. I did the license, the FAA license, before I actually flew drone, because flying a drone and getting license are not comparable. License is about your knowledge, and flying is about basically manual thing. The problem is, flying drone is very easy, actually. It's not really complicated. No aspect of it, except, you have to set it up. But the matter is your confidence. When I go up in a place, I have to be confident that I know what I'm doing. Like I'm not losing it, or it's got away from me. And that part, it's kind of a mental that you have to kind of train yourselves, like, because there is a lot of what they call fail safe built into that drone, and it's getting better and better. Like the drone won't run away from you and always comes back to you. That's part of a deal if you know what you're doing. But having that confidence that actually I'm going over, say lake 3 miles, and then I actually have confidence that I'm not going to sink into that lake. That's a little bit difficult. But I think in my case, it was all self-taught. I didn't take any courses except for the course of getting the license. Everything else was, like you said, in my backyard or the flying field in a park. I was going in and practicing, and flying for the pictures is actually easy. You go up, you go to place, you take pictures. Flying for the film, it's difficult for the video, because then you have all the moves. Then you actually, the controls how you manage the controls will show on the video. So that's the part. And when probably the most difficult thing I ever done, and I had no really great knowledge of flying, was getting the permission from the park to fly. It was a 3-month licensing, not licensing, it's a process that, you have to fill out a lot of applications and had to be approved. But some of it was just, I don't know, the more you do, then my experience, the more I do, then you get more confident. And I went through probably not every trouble. I crashed once. You go in a lot of troubles.
Pete, if you get one, just run into a tree right away and get it out of the way, and then you won't have to worry about that later. Yeah.
Yep.
I did it too. So.
Well, I have to say that there's a couple of guys here in Madison that have drones, and I ran into one of them who was flying right over the Capitol, and I started talking to him, and I could tell he was getting annoyed with me that I was asking him questions, and now I understand why. Like, he's flying and I'm trying to ask him questions, and he's trying to fly his drone. So I won't do that anymore.
That's what you need, VO, visual observer, to deflect the unwanted ones. No, but yeah, it's the more I fly, it's not like you get sort of more adventurous necessarily because I have to follow the rules, but it definitely, it's you get more confident, like when you have elements, like you have clouds coming at you, or you have I'm going up on the lake in the winter and I can see the snow in my camera. I said, oh, that's not good. but yeah, I crashed on the ones, but a couple of times I lost control, lost control. It just didn't respond right. And, you get kind of spooked for about 15, 20 seconds. And that's about 30 seconds it takes for the system to kick in. And you just have to wait and make sure it kicks in, that performs the way it's designed to. But use for the news, it's going to be even increasingly more difficult because a lot of agencies now, fire departments, all of them now, and the police that are going to use drones for their own work. So that's really difficult. The only thing, as far as a news go, the best place to photograph, the one, which is usually easy, it's floods, it's slow moving, benign, and after sort of a tornado or something like that, because all you would need, as long as the FAA has no restrictions put in, which you can get from your app, permission from someone or be on a public road to be able to fly. As long as you're not interfering with any rescue operations, that's the paramount. That you cannot allow. If you hear a helicopter, get the hell out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway,
go ahead. Anybody else have a question for Zbigniew?
Hey, for your empty Chicago pictures, outside of the one over the bean, it seemed like you had like a certain elevation. Like if I was a first-time pilot, I'd probably want to go as high as I could just to see if I could do it. But you seem to have found a certain height that, especially in downtown Chicago, you weren't even as high as the tallest buildings. Is that part of your style? Is there a certain sweet spot you look for? What do you determine for how high to go, for what angle? Because you're unlimited, you can go anywhere.
Well, 400 feet is your limit. So by FAA's designation, you can go 400 over the building, if you really want to exercise your rights, then you run into some risks, than down Chicago, because there is some other traffic usually. So, but legally it's 400 feet. That's the highest you go. So, when I go up, I usually go high because, in my experience, I want to go as high as possible, and I go circle. I just point my camera in different directions because I don't know what I'm going to see. So then I hone on something and choose the elevation. So I usually go up and I look around from the drone, from that perspective, if I can, of course, if it's safe, because you usually have elements, you have a wind, you have some weather coming and stuff like that, and decide. But I discovered that, yeah, you go 400 feet, that's your max for most places. And you look, but then a lot of interesting pictures are coming from much lower angle. In Chicago, it's somewhat difficult because I don't want to go over the river and to see what you can see from the building. So what's the big deal? I try to avoid those kind of views because I can climb on a garage and see that. So I'm not going to hovering over the garage. I want to go to the places which the view is different. And especially the neighborhoods, like, Chinatown, you cannot be over that street. You have to be right in the middle of the street. But going high would not be very productive because that would be just common view. When you go sort of even below the buildings, that is, to me, that's a sweet spot. That would be the unusual, could be very unusual vantage, which you would not be able to get any other way. So I don't know. Since I left Tribune, I had to leave all my toys behind. So I got my personal drone now, and I do flights, a couple of times a week. I go and sometimes I just futz around basically because it's not the manual thing. It's totally this part is extremely easy. It's not like playing games on a computer or anything like that. This is nothing. It's pretty simple. The sticks are pretty simple. Flying is easy, but the whole process of flying, it's much more complex. So if you didn't have experience like Pete, I really want to fly. I don't know if you flew the drone. That part of flying is actually very simple. I encourage everybody to try it. I mean, it's really, I train a lot of people from my staff. Before I was leaving, I had like 5 people sign up for licenses. Actually, one of them made it. And so we did some flights, and I always get this thing up and give the controls like, come on, up, down, left, right, what the big deal?
It's just when it gets turned around and it's opposite of what you're trying to do, then that's when it gets a little tricky. I've seen people try to land them on a boat before, and instead of having it look the same direction as you are, they're trying to land it coming at you. And so they're trying to time it with the waves, and there's lots of goofy things with, if you take off from a boat and you hit the return to home button and the boat's not in the same spot, it's going to try and land in the water.
Yeah.
So there's little tricks to the trade like that, but
yeah, no, that gets complicated sometimes, but flying it is easy. I mean, it's you go up, and those things are great, and I think that really opened a lot of for me, opened a lot of possibilities. I did have a lot of helicopter and a lot of other flights, but I think drone is much more intimate. I can go, wait for the right moment, not the light. I don't care too much about the pretty pictures. There's people who are doing this very well in Chicago, but you can put yourself in a place. I can carry this thing in my backpack. I can put myself in a place in the time of my choosing, and I can go up, and it's not invasive. I mean, it's right now they are very quiet, and I'm not disturbing anything, and I can go to pretty peculiar places to fly. So that's the biggest draw for me, It's that it's not a huge production. It's not scheduling of flights. You in charge basically of the process. So it's just like having a little camera in the pocket and you deploy as you want it.
Would you kind of say it's like having I guess like another lens in your lens bag or in your camera bag? It's kind of hard to tell a story with just those pictures or just that aerial images, but it used in moderation, I think it's a great tool to have. Like your shot of the tornado with the swirls and all that. I mean, those kind of images would. Joe, you have a story about that, right?
No, Zbigniew.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if I could say your name right.
Yeah, you can do wrong with my name. You can go Z, it's fine too.
Well, tell me, we all enjoyed, I'm sure, as people, persons like it was always so helpful in our careers as photojournalists, knowing about people, and the fact that you weren't going to, or the possibility that you weren't going to share with us your origins, your history was disappointing to me. So I'm so glad that you did share about your background. So what was it that got you into photography? Were you supposed to be a photographer, Z?
Well, that's in my heart. I'm supposed to be a photographer. I knew that. But I went to school to be a nuclear physicist. I know.
Just like all of us.
I know. And I got really disappointed. That wasn't me. So after 3 years, but this was different times and different country. Yeah, I was doing photography, and he wasn't a really photojournalist per se at that moment, but I was just photographing, compulsively. I was just, I have some of the archives on me. Now I'll probably have time to dig in. So it wasn't the normal way of getting into it, but photography became basically what I do. And after many years, it's me basically.
How did you get your first camera? I mean, were you from a family with wealth or poverty, or what? That first camera.
Communist, there was no distinction. Everybody has the same. Come on, ain't there no privilege? It's only privileges, but no wealth. No, the cameras were, I think my family bought the camera. This was not expensive. Problem up there at the time, it was not what you can buy, only if it's available, so because they had shortages of everything. So I had actually my first real camera, it's not. It would be kind of like it's a 6x6 twin lens. So we didn't have photographic materials were not available wildly, so it was a lot of improvisation.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing. And I think that every one of us was just relating to every image that you had. It was like, God, if we only could have been there. Just every picture I enjoyed, and I just so thankful for your presentation today.
It was wonderful.
Mark, thank
I have
you.
a quick question. Going back to Poland and solidarity, do you know a photojournalist named Karen Sherlock, now Karen Sherlock Kenyon? She was on the staff at the Milwaukee Journal and Milwaukee Sentinel and was studying in Poland when solidarity came to be. And she started taking pictures, and it's quite a story. Don Winslow was a picture editor at the Sentinel at the time. And the way Karen worked to sneak her film out of the country, hoping for the best, hoping that it would get mailed to the Sentinel picture desk. And what they worked out, they published the photos in the Sentinel, but of course they weren't going to identify Karen because that would compromise her safety. And it was credited simply to
a student with Wisconsin ties. The photographs were taken by a student with Wisconsin ties, who of course was one of their staff photographers.
Hmm.
But
Well,
Karen
that's
lives in the Milwaukee area. I could put you two in touch with each other if you want that. But
well, that's interesting. You know, the whole solidarity. I left right before. I left '79.
yeah,
So when solidarity came, I was in Panama at the time traveling. I had no recollection. I mean, and after that, during the martial law, I wasn't able to contact anyone for about a year. That's include my family. So I have no, you know, secondhand information. So it's such a privilege to be there and witness that the whole situation. You know, I have a lot of friends who I reestablished contacts now, who, you know, in different degree documented that era. That's, you know, I wasn't allowed to go. I couldn't go back to Poland for 10 years.
yeah.
So it was interesting. What's her name again?
Karen. Her name at the time was Karen Sherlock.
Sherlock.
And now she's married. It's Karen Kenyon, Kenyon,
Okay.
like the
I look
college
her
in
up.
Ohio. What's
Karen's
that?
actually
I will
been a
look her up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Karen's been a part of our group here. When we used to meet in
Yeah,
person, she was there quite a lot, so.
She's probably
Okay.
on the email list.
Yeah, I'll have to check
Okay.
that to see if she is on there. If she's not,
Yeah.
we'll definitely add her. I'm going to jump in real quick and I'm going to just stop the recording. So we're at an hour and a half. You guys can stay on here. You don't have to leave, but if you've been watching the video, thanks for joining us. And our next meeting is going to be on April 30th at noon.